It used to be that our bookshelves, our windows, and what we hung on our walls, well, those details were just kind of in the background. But then COVID changed everything. Suddenly, hundreds of millions of us were spending hours a day on video calls, and our once private interior spaces became public facades. It felt like the whole world was looking at our backgrounds, and some of us got a little obsessed. We bought lights and plants and books. We painted walls. We straightened, angled, and tweaked. Sometimes we got desperate and used backgrounds that weren't even ours. And we did it all because we knew that the scene behind us was telling the world who we were. We wanted our backgrounds to communicate that we were smart, stylish, fun, and had it all figured out, even when we didn't. Background mania may seem like peak 2020, but here's the thing. It's been around for hundreds of years. Before Zoom, before dial-up, even before electricity, there were people in Korea who were curating their backgrounds with an intensity that would blow the mind of even the most self-obsessed live streamer today. Just take a look at this. This is a Korean painted folding screen called Chaekgeori. Chaekgeori, loosely translated as books and things, is a genre of Korean still life painting popular in late Joseon Korea. Folding screens were widely used in 19th century Korea as a decorative backdrop for a study, reception room, and for events. When people came over to visit, your Chaekgeori would be in the room where you'd meet them. Like walls and shelves in modern homes, the folding screen in Joseon Korea was functional. You could put all the things you didn't want your guests to see, like household clutter, behind them. But more importantly, the images on your Chaekgeori told your guests who you were. It was decorative furniture to express your taste and philosophy. Take, for example, this elaborate Chaekgeori. It's called Scholar's Studio behind leopard skin curtain, painted in the 1800s. A luscious leopard skin covers a 10-foot wide 8-panel folding screen. Experts don't know the name of the person it belonged to, but its voluptuous intensity still tells us so much about the owner and how they wanted to be seen by others. In the middle of the screen, the artist has painted an optical illusion. It looks like the leopard skin is being lifted, giving guests a furtive peek of the owner's study and of all the things within it. An almost secretive desire to discover and examine each and every one of these interesting objects is aroused in the viewer. What are these things? Who owns them? Each of the objects is meant to tell a story. But before we go into their story, let's talk about the story of Chaekgeori itself. That story begins hundreds of years earlier and a continent away. We're in Europe in the age of discovery. Merchants and explorers were traveling to places no one had dreamed of, the Americas, Asia, and Africa, and they were bringing back all kinds of fascinating curiosities, plants, animals, scientific instruments, books, and so much more. Soon, everyone who could afford to, from scholars to princes, started collecting these curiosities and keeping them in special cabinets called Kunstkammer, or Cabinet of Curiosities, for showing off. The point was that visitors could come and see these collections of exotic swords, narwhal horns, paintings, shells, and other things, and be suitably impressed with how rich and smart the collector was. These 16th century influencers were curating their collections as carefully as today's influencers curate their Instagram feeds. Though referred to as a cabinet in English, the Kunstkammer were entire rooms, but not everyone could make the trek to see your actual collection in person. So European collectors started having paintings and other representations of their collections made. Many of these paintings utilize trompe-l'œil, which means deceives the eye, an artistic technique that seeks to give the illusion of three-dimensionality to 2D surfaces. Take a look at these wooden wall decorations, made in the late 15th century. They were created for the studio of Federico da Montefeltro, one of the most successful mercenary captains of the Italian Renaissance. The painting makes it feel like you're standing in his curiosity cabinet, browsing the collection that signifies him as a worldly, intelligent man. Books, bells, horns, pipes. 17th century German Europeans used Kunstkammer to reveal their political authority and knowledge. This piece was found in the Kunstkammer of Frederick III, who ruled Denmark-Norway in 1648. The painting depicts a jumble of objects. Near the back are two books, partially covered by a cloth. The rear book contains botanical and human illustrations, while the front one shows a maritime map. The books are flanked on both sides by scientific instruments, a drawer full of exotic shells and pearls, and a variety of other symbolic artifacts. This painting, in sum, shows the king's erudition in natural science, and his rational and scientific leadership over his maritime realm. The collection is topped by this divine trumpet, resting unceremoniously upon a document, a kingly proclamation. The casual disarray of these extraordinary items lends an air of authenticity to the proclaimed message about the king's leadership style. It's like a slice of life scene in the day of a king. Still Life with Books by the French painter Françoise Fouesse is another trompe-l'œil painting. A realistic curtain is partially pulled back, revealing chaotically stacked books. Like the Kunstkammer of Frederick III, the messy bookshelf ingeniously portrays the patron as a very busy, very scholarly person. To exhibit his worldly literary tastes, the patron has carefully selected the books: Ovid's Metamorphoses, Robinson Crusoe, A Voyage to India, and Euclid. Soon, incredibly detailed collection paintings were everywhere. Italian missionaries brought them to China, and before long, the Chinese emperor and nobility were creating shelves that displayed their sophisticated collections of books, flowers, pens, and furniture. They called these shelves, and the paintings of them, Duobaoge. And from China, this new form of art traveled to Korea. Which brings us back to Scholar's studio behind leopard skin curtain. The jumbled arrangement of items framed by a curtain is strikingly similar to images we've seen elsewhere. Remember, Chaekgeori were backgrounds that people brought out when they had visitors. They were meant to be seen by others. Which books, which photos, which precious collector's items to show on them was not a question of function, but a social, philosophical, and even a strategic one. These folding screens, painstakingly planned and crafted, were a facade for the owner's persona, a medium by which to express personality and identity. So what does this Chaekgeori reveal about the unknown owner's identity? Well, you can't miss the leopard skin. Korea is a small, mountainous peninsula, and its inhabitants had little choice but to settle the forests, putting tigers and leopards closer to civilization in the process. Tigers and leopards, considered the same animal, became a beast of lore, a force to fear, but also to conquer. Eventually, they were elevated to divine, sacred animals. Believing that they warded off evil spirits and bad luck, Koreans decorated gates and doors with leopard patterns, and bridal palanquins were covered with tiger skins. Tigers and leopards also signified bravery. Joseon kings gave leopard skins as gifts to high-level military officers and important dignitaries, who would have displayed them proudly. As you can imagine, actual leopard skin was a rare item to possess. But even so, the skillfully painted depiction of leopard skin we can see on this screen would have been a luxury that came at a high price. The painter skillfully uses delicate brushstroke to express the texture of fur and the shade of the ink to contrast the back and the belly. To be able to afford such fine work, the person who commissioned this screen must have been from an established aristocratic family. He was also a trendy individual, willing to reinvigorate the mundane folding screen with hip Chaekgeori decoration. Now let's take a look at this trompe-l'œil effect, where the leopard skin curtain is drawn up, revealing his shelf of curiosities. Here the owner seems to be saying, "I look rich, tough, and important, but if you peek behind the curtain, you'll see I'm an intellectual too." There's a lot going on back here. First, there are the books. Clearly, he wants you to know that he reads a lot. And look at how the books are next to the tea set and eating utensils. Here he's making the suggestion that he's the sort of person who reads even during meals. The pomegranate is a traditional Korean symbol that expresses a wish for fertility. The coral branch and peacock feather express the desire for a successful career, as these were items which officials of the first rank wore on their hats. The message seems to be that as high as this person has climbed, there is still more that he wishes for. Anyone who visited the owner of this Chaekgeori in 19th century Korea could not have failed to notice another detail: the pipes. Tobacco had been introduced to Korea in the late 16th century, and by the time this screen was made, smoking was wildly popular. Everyone in Korean society smoked. Men, women, common laborers, and even members of the royal court. But you'll notice that this screen has two pipes. Why? There's a world of meaning here too. The first pipe is long, almost ridiculously so. How could anyone even light that? they couldn't. And that was the point. A pipe this long had to be loaded and lit by servants. So, if you had this pipe, you were making a statement that you were wealthy, which our scholar clearly was. But if our Chaekgeori owner has a long pipe, why do they also have this short pipe? Well, short pipes were the common man's pipe. Easy to carry, easy to light, you didn't need a servant's help. So by showing off this second, shorter pipe, the person who owned this screen was saying, I'm rich enough to have the best long pipes, but I'm not some helpless aristocrat who needs a servant's help to do anything. I can light my own pipe when I want, and sometimes I do. And we can get all of this from the arrangement of just a few objects. If we were to really dive into everything in this scholar's studio, this video would be 3 hours long. So just remember this the next time you move a houseplant or adjust the lighting ahead of your next Zoom call. Everything in the background tells a story, and these stories have been told for a long, long time.